Mr. Atilla Kisla, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. You work for the Southern Africa Litigation Centre, which has been involved in bringing potential international crimes cases before South African courts. Could you tell us a bit about some of the key cases you have brought before the courts, and what are the challenges as well as some of the key successes that you've had with these cases?
So SALC did a number of cases in relation to international crimes and international criminal justice. Cases that certainly stand out are, for instance, the torture docket case, where the case actually defined the scope of the universal jurisdiction principle at an investigation stage. Another case would certainly be the al-Bashir case, where SALC was the litigant in enforcing an arrest warrant against former President Omar al-Bashir, the Sudanese president, to enforce the arrest in South Africa during his visit. But more recently, we have been also engaging in the Putin matter, as well as cases that don't look really like at international criminal law. International criminal law usually looks at the crimes after they happen and to seek accountability. So we started to think about this more creatively and started thinking about how can we actually prevent the further commissioning of international crimes, which is why we are also engaging in arms export cases and trying to prevent, for instance, South African arms exports to countries that are accused of committing international crimes. One of these cases is certainly the Myanmar arms trade case, where we received an order that the South African authorities must suspend any arms exports if that country in question is accused by a UN mandate holder to commit international crimes. These cases, of course, come with their own challenges and risks. Of course, for the organization and the individuals at the organization, at SALC, there are security risks that come with these cases. But also in terms of the political climate, these kind of cases can put a target on the back of civil society organizations like SALC and many other organizations that seek accountability in these kind of contexts.
Could you also tell us about some of the successes that you've had with the cases that you have brought before the courts?
Sure. Successes, I would certainly say, are the cases that I mentioned, the torture docket case, which defined the scope of the universal jurisdiction principle at the investigation stage. And successes are certainly the arms trade case, where we received the order that confirmed that the state must suspend these kind of arms exports. So there are landmark cases that we had the privilege to engage with, but there's always that could be done, and so we are still trying to push the limits of the law to adhere with international standards and best practices.
So we have seen many European countries trying universal jurisdiction cases. What should African states do in order to ensure that they themselves have the opportunity to try this type of cases? Is this a possibility? And if so, how can we ensure that this principle is adopted and implemented on the continent?
There's definitely a lot of potential for African states to pursue or apply the principle of universal jurisdiction. I think what certainly, if we look at Europe and the European cases of universal jurisdiction, which are focusing on cases related to the Syrian conflict, certainly the geopolitical interests of or non-existing political interests in relation to Syria played a role and gave states and authorities to prosecute these cases, and in that regard it facilitated that. that might be slightly different in the African context, and that again depends on the countries that we are speaking about. So in that regard, I think it's very important to be aware of the political climate in each country, but not be limited or directed by a political climate. So just because a country is not maybe that outspoken on principles of international justice or universal jurisdiction, I don't think that should be a hurdle or like an obstacle that one cannot overcome in that context. In relation to how civil society can come together, I think civil society plays a crucial role in this context. Of course, civil society can work together with the authorities, can of course file criminal complaints in order to trigger a process. But I think as civil society, and if we speak about civil society in general, I think there's a bigger need to come together and have a coherent strategy that I think must be led by local domestic organizations as well as regional organizations. Only if we can achieve that, I think we can have a sustainable impact on the authorities, and the principle of universal jurisdiction doesn't become this novel or unique part of the law.
Could you tell us about some of the challenges that you have faced with the cases you've brought before South African courts?
If we start with legal challenges, South Africa or also other African countries, I think it's important to point out that very often the legal framework for universal jurisdiction is not so much the issue. I think as civil society, we must also understand that the challenges derive not necessarily from a lack of framework or legal basis. The challenges very often derive from other aspects like judicial independence or capacity at the prosecuting authorities. So I think in the legal context, that's certainly these are factors that must be considered. Political challenges, just to mention a very recent example, we are speaking here now a few days after the ICC member states issued a joint statement in reaction to the US sanctions against the ICC, specifically the ICC prosecutor. And in that statement was, for instance, only supported by 15 African ICC member states. That means that 18 African member states, ICC member states, I apologize, have not subscribed to a statement which uses a very soft language and which only speaks at its concluding remarks that regrets any attempt to undermine the court's independence. So I think that shows how that even countries who are part of the Rome Statute and have subscribed to the idea of international criminal justice are actually struggling with the public and the public perception. So I think that is something that can be addressed by civil society. And that's why I think it's important that these kind of efforts are led by domestic or regional organizations to create a sustainable impact. In terms of logistics, very often in our experience, it's logistics can be very basic things like, especially when we speak about the principle of universal jurisdiction, we usually also, that involves witnesses that are coming from a different country or are currently in a different country. And the logistics of like transport or even organizing a passport for those witnesses can become challenging and a costly exercise for the authorities or civil society organizations in that context. But there are so many different layers to this that those logistics are one factor. Another logistics are, I would say, the counseling of witnesses and victims, which is not spoken enough about. I think that the prosecuting authorities cannot always accommodate the needs and the needs of those victims.
Do you think regional collaboration among African civil society organizations could enhance the exercise of universal jurisdiction on the continent? And if so, how?
I think be open for conversations, even if it's difficult conversations, whether it's on the part of the civil society or the national prosecuting authorities. With respect to civil society in particular, I think it's important to have a strategy and to be in communication and exchange with other civil society stakeholders in order to prevent bad precedents or cases that might set the country in question, set the jurisprudence in that context back. Very often I say in this context, it's more important to know when not to litigate than when to litigate. So I think that's another crucial aspect. With respect to engaging with the authorities, in our experience, I think these kind of relationships that civil society needs to build in order to pursue these cases cannot be built up or established within one meeting or within one day. So civil society needs to make an active effort to engage with the authorities, and in that context also have the patience to build up the trust and to build up those meaningful relationships.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atilla Kisla, for joining us for this interview. We are very much grateful for your time.